All right, YouTube, just a forewarning. Over the next couple of days, it's supposed to be ungodly hot here. For Vermont standards, at this time of year at least, it's going to be almost 90 degrees, very high humidity. I probably won't do as many videos over those 2 days as I've been doing for the last few weeks each day, just out of necessity. I mean, it's going to be too unbearable. I'm going to be sitting there taking a couple of cold rinse-offs each day, trying to take it easy, probably play some RuneScape or something. That's all I'm going to have energy for. I mean, I still got to mow like half of the property, which is going to be absolute torment, but it has to be done, unfortunately. So sweaty sticks will exist in lieu of video making sticks for a while. But this is an important video because it is now seen that Trump has already clinched the Republican nomination. Now, it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of whether it waited until the June 7th voting with like California, New Jersey, and so forth, at which he'd hit 1,400 easily and probably be, up towards 1,500 anyway. And then he would clinch, or whether, some unpledged delegates would say publicly, yeah, I'm going to support Trump because he's the inevitable nominee. He's obviously won. I'm unpledged. I'm just going to gravitate towards the person who's already won anyway, so I can say I didn't waste everybody's time. It turns out that the latter is the case. He's not going to have to wait till June 7th. He's already now the nominee. Officially, ironclad promise, yes, it will be Trump running in the general election. There are no longer any shenanigans that can stop that. There are no last-minute rule changes, no dark horse candidates, no independent Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush ticket. It's just not going to happen. He's showing this way that by simply talking to some unpledged delegates, he won over their support. That's party unification. It's the Democratic Party in disarray right now. Hillary Clinton is having great difficulty. If she performs badly on the last day of primary voting against Sanders, if he manages to do well in California, if he manages to do well enough elsewhere, then he could pose a very real danger to Hillary Clinton getting the nomination. Now, I still predict at the end of the day, the DNC will pull out all stops and suppress Sanders from actually getting it. But that being said, if it goes to a contested convention and forces the DNC to do so, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz has to very visibly rig the system once more against Sanders, it's going to piss off several tens of millions of Sanders supporters who will not be voting for the DNC candidate. They won't vote for Hillary. They may not support Trump. They may not support anybody else. They'll stay home, they'll find a third-party candidate, or they'll vote for Trump just to punish their own party. You'd be surprised, I think, how many millions of people right now, if Hillary's the nominee, which almost certainly she will be, will vote for Trump just out of spite. No, they don't even like Trump. They don't even agree with his policies. They're like, we're going to punish the DNC for doing this to a candidate who has consistently polled higher against Trump. I say that's a misnomer, but that's what they feel. Who is more honest, who's not backed by bankers and so forth. On the other side, had they really pulled out all the stops in the Republican Party to stop Trump, had they really tried to force Jeb or Ted Cruz or Rubio or somebody down the party's throat, the same thing would have happened. People would have voted for Hillary out of spite. Many millions of people would have done that because they're not partisans. A lot of the people supporting people like Trump and Sanders, the Democratic partisans mostly support Hillary because their only token is we want the Democrats to win. They see she's ahead. They saw her as inevitable to begin with, and they piled on top of her. Sanders supporters are arguably, even though he's further left, they're less partisan within the Democratic Party because the Democratic establishment moved to the right. Hillary Clinton's to the right of Obama. Hillary Clinton's to the right of John Kerry. She's, oddly enough, in most senses, she's a centrist. She's an authoritarian centrist. She still believes in banning guns, but not for any weird utopian liberal reason. It's just because she wants more police state. Well, that's also a problem with youth voters now, of course, flocking to Trump. And Gary Johnson as well, I would say. And Jill Stein. I'm sure the Green Party will do better than it did the last time around. But the gig is up for anybody who thought there was any possibility of Trump not being the Republican nominee. They were wrong. They are now provably wrong. I had one person, up until Carson literally dropped out of the race on that day, saying over and over, Ben Carson will be the nominee. God told me this. People said they'll jerry-rig Jeb into the system. Somehow they'll disqualify Trump. They'll discredit Trump. They'll run a campaign against Trump that'll be absolutely vicious. He'll falter. Jeb will get it. Or then they said Rubio would get it because Jeb dropped out. Then when Marco Rubio dropped out, they said, oh, Ted Cruz out of nowhere, he'll magically get like 90% of the remaining delegates, which is what he would have needed to get by the time Indiana rolled around. I mean, by the time New York rolled around, sorry. And that was never a possibility. So yes, Trump has officially, mathematically speaking, clinched it. Now, I say there are actually multiple points you can claim as the date in which he won. The first is Nevada. Because having won 3 out of the 4 beginning primaries, he shot so far ahead of his opponents and solidified his support so handily that there was never really any leeway in such a crowded field for anyone else to challenge him on Super Tuesday, which is the second clinching point, at which he had won a total of 10 states. He had won more states than everyone else combined. He utterly destroyed most of his competitors, which didn't even break into the double digits. There was no longer any real problem in his campaign with forcing everybody one by one out of the race, because as he continued to win, his numbers inched up and he could thin the field repeatedly. And because there were fewer people left to be spoken for, fewer undecided voters, it never hurt him. The third would be Indiana, of course. By Indiana, it was no longer mathematically possible for anyone else to even reach the threshold. But that was for propaganda purposes. Ted Cruz held on and said, well, if we win Indiana, we can go forward. It's a must-win. But he boxed himself in there. You see, it was Ted Cruz's own doing. He boxed him a few weeks before the voting when he was up in the polls a little bit or whatever, and his internal polling was more optimistic. He said, oh, it's a must-win. We will win Indiana. We will stop Trump here, and then we'll go on to magically we're going to win California. Never knew how he was going to do this, but he claimed that he was able to do so somehow. Again, I'm not sure how. But he said he must win, and then, of course, his numbers dwindled and dwindled, and Trump won by double digits. At that point, it no longer made sense to stay in. Kasich then had to bow out because what's the fucking point? So there are multiple points you can say that he clinched the nomination. It could be, depending on how you argue. If you're arguing in hindsight being 2020, Nevada was really the state that did it, only the 4th state to vote. Why? It's quite simple. Look at the history of it. It's because of the demographics of these states. You have South Carolina, a slightly balanced but Dixiecrat-style state. Southern Democrats / Southern, more nativistic Republicans. Nevada, sort of business Republicans. And New Hampshire, more independent, more secular, and in many ways more libertarian. He won all 3 of them. The only outlier was Iowa. Where did we see this before? Oh, with Rick Santorum back against Romney. I saw the writing on the wall at that point because I said, Cruz, by Nevada, had already locked himself in the evangelical part of the country. He pulled a Santorum. He was never going to be able to break out of that. I never saw Ted Cruz as a viable contender against Trump. Never once did I claim that he was. I said Rubio would have been his most viable contender. Once Jeb was gone. Jeb was a joke because he was a Bush. That's why he didn't get momentum. That's why he crashed and burned. Once it became clear he had lost much of his support and that he had no hardened support base, he was done. There was no chance he was going to be the nominee. With Marco Rubio, he did have a chance up until he self-sabotaged at the debate with Chris Christie. At that point, Marco Rubio was no longer a viable candidate because he looked too rehearsed, too robotic, and too scripted. Up until then, yes, he was the only other person perhaps at the time who could have beat Trump. He could have. Marco Rubio would have been capable. He was well-spoken enough. He had a little bit of experience. He was kind of seen as too establishment by many, but he could have consolidated. In the absence of a more powerful Ted Cruz or a John Kasich running Maverick mode, he could have consolidated more than 50% of the party under a Never Trump banner. Most of it would have been just people that thought he was smarter, but he could have done that. After he self-sabotaged, after Christie took him out, no, there was no chance that was going to happen. At that point, it became fairly clear who was going to win. Another marker was Florida. When Rubio lost his home state, the only viable person who could have actually stood up to Trump dropped out of the race. Cruz was never viable. From the beginning to the end, Cruz was never going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. Remember the song, Cruz the Loser. He will not be the nominee. Well, I predicted that sometime a couple months before he dropped out because it was clear he would. As for Jab, he was a joke. Chris Christie never was going to gain traction. Ben Carson may be likable, but you could tell by his debate performances being essentially him half asleep the entire time, his campaign was never going to be more than second tier. The rest of them were just a laughing stock. Carly Fiorina had no chance. None of them did. It was going to be Trump or Rubio essentially. And once Rubio fucked himself, who was left? It was Donald Trump. So there you go. Trump has clinched it mathematically, but really back in Nevada was essentially, it was already looking pretty good for him at that point. That's about all. Peace out.